Hello and welcome to another video in the How Do I Do Something in CloudBolt video series. My name is Mike Bombard and I'm one of the principal cloud architects on the pre-sale side of the house here. And today we're going to be discussing how do I use a GitHub app for source control authentication in CloudBolt. So the challenge here is that out of the box, CloudBolt supports personal access tokens or PATs when you authenticate to GitHub as your remote source for CloudBolt content. Could be blueprints or CloudBolt actions, those types of things. But a lot of our customers also want to leverage GitHub apps to make these API calls to their repositories. That solves some of the challenges, like if you have personnel that leaves, where the personal access token that was generated to authenticate relies on their account, then this now no longer works. So leveraging a GitHub app makes this a little bit more persistent in your environments. It also, because it's technically a service that's authenticating to do these types of requests, it also uses a service account to pull that information down. Now, in most scenarios, at least what we're going to be covering today, we do not require write permissions on your repositories. We would just need, for the sample that I put together here, you would just need read repository access. So just something to keep in mind. It isn't super critical just because it's only a read function. We're just pulling down data, but like I mentioned, if somebody leaves and their personal access token was tied to their account, that you could risk the loss of just the connection until another personal access token is added. So we're going to go through setting up to meet this challenge. I've put together a recurring job in CloudBolt that will take in an app ID and a private key for your GitHub app. And then it will use that information to reach out to the repository that you've specified, the branch that you've specified, to pull down content to the local file system. And then what you can do in CloudBolt, your remote source then becomes those files on the local file system. So you can set your recurring job to happen as often or as seldom as you would like. I think in the example we'll be going through today, I have it set to once an hour. It will run and pull down the latest copy of the code from your GitHub repo. So what we're going to go through, here's the agenda for the call. We're going to start off just going through the background, just kind of showing what this looks like today and what the existing behavior is. Then we're going to set up a GitHub app. We're going to set up the recurring job. We're going to run the schedule job, just kind of walk you through showing that those files are getting updated on the file system. And then we're going to show how to set the content to remote source. We're just going to do this for a very basic CloudBolt plugin or an action in CloudBolt. But you can also do this for things like blueprints or inbound webhooks, those types of things as well. So so looking forward to today's video. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so like I mentioned in the introduction, the traditional way in CloudBolt to authenticate to GitHub is via an auth token. So if you were to go and create a new Git connection info, you would then be prompted to pass it an authorization token here. And again, this is tied very closely to a user account, typically a personal authentication token. So we want to help work around that. So this is kind of what we're working to get around. Now, what is nice is with auth tokens, at least in the product, what we can do is either as a blueprint, or I think I have one here. Here's a blueprint that's using remote source. Notice the blueprint is now read only in this instance because the source control becomes the source of truth for this blueprint. But if we look at the remote source here, again, in this context, this would be a separate password here for the remote source that, again, is really a personal access token. So, so again, we're trying to work with this confined within the system. So I put together a sample. It should be enough to hopefully work for your environment, but if not, it's a really, really good start. It's got all of the authentication handled. It will copy down the entire zip file from GitHub and then unzip it into the directory that you specify. So we're going to go ahead and start setting those things up now. Let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start with GitHub itself. I'm going to go over to my settings. I am by no means a GitHub app professional. I've done enough to be dangerous. I'm going to set one up for my user account, but you, in your instance, you're probably going to want to set one up for your enterprise, have it work with your organization, GitHub admin to go through these steps to set this up. I have one that's existing that I've been testing with, but we're going to create a new one here. Let's do call it, give it a name. I could give it a description, those kinds of things, but I really just don't care. I'm going to give this, I don't really need to redirect or do anything with callback URLs or anything like that. So I'm just going to kind of do cloudbolt.io for all of these. Do not want to expire user authorization tokens. I may have bear with me. I'm going to leave this set this way, and then I'll match what my other one looks like after I've saved things. I don't want a webhook. I don't necessarily need a webhook tied to this. Then permissions. This is kind of where we start to get into things that are maybe a little more important. But if we set up permissions here, repository permissions, really the only thing I believe I need is going to be, you know what, I did read and write when testing, but like I'd mentioned earlier, I'm pretty sure we need just read on a couple of things. So commit statuses, I am querying the API to figure out the branch SHA and things like that. So I do need to be able to query the commit statuses. I'm going to do read only here. And then contents, I need to be able to view the contents in these repositories as well. So 2 for read only. It also added metadata for me as a mandatory one that we need. That should be it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do only on this account for now, because again, this is an internal one. This isn't meant to be used in a production environment. This is just for me testing. I'm going to create the GitHub app now. Doesn't like underscores. There we go. I have a GitHub app. I'm going to go over to permissions and events now. Remember, we have our repository permissions set. I want to that's right. What I want to do is I want to go to install app. I need to install it for my account first. And I need to do only select repositories. You could do all repositories if you might be cloning multiple ones, but I like to be a little more explicit for security's sake. So I'm going to do my CloudBolt samples repository. I'm going to just install it for this specific repository. So read access to code and commit statuses. It kind of gives you the permissions that we're requiring, or that this sample is requiring. Once this is set up now, I have my repository configured. Now I'm on my account. I'm going to go back over to my app. And again, like I mentioned, I just want to make sure that this request user authorization. So I'm going to set that up. To their identity. I don't know that we need that. I'm going to leave that deselected. I don't think that's something that we actually need here. So I think we should be good to go. I'm going to save changes here. The next thing I need to do is generate a new client secret. And then this client secret, I'm going to need to copy this client secret. And I'm going to just store this for later off to the side. That's not what I need. I need private key. So I need to generate a private key as well. So generate a client secret, generate a private key. The client secret I don't necessarily need to hang on to for now, but I do need this private key. Did it download? Oh, there we go. It downloaded for me. So we go ahead. Okay, now I have my private key. That's I have it open in another window, and then I'm going to capture my app ID. I'm going to need both of these for setting this up. But now that I have my private key and my app ID, it's been installed on my account and it's been permissioned to the appropriate repositories that I want to be able to leverage with CloudBolt. That really should be all that we need to do with the GitHub app. Now that we have this set up, we should be good to go. Switch screens over to CloudBolt and start working with the recurring job there. All right, so now we're over in the CloudBolt system, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new recurring job. So I got here from just hitting the drop down, going to recurring jobs. And then I'm going to, I don't want to add it from a job. That was the wrong selection. We're going to go back, add from an action. We're going to create a new CloudBolt plugin. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to go ahead. You could, if you wanted to, if you had multiple repositories you wanted to sync down to CloudBolt, you could make this a shared plugin, and then you can reuse it in multiple recurring jobs. I'll show you what I mean here in just a minute. I'm not going to do that just because I'm only going to do this for a single instance, but let's go ahead. We're going to create this now. And I'm going to put the code that I'm using for the action as a link in the video description once things get uploaded. So I'm going to go over to the action that got created. I have all of my code here. Let's go ahead and copy that, delete that, paste it here, save the code. Now I have a number of inputs that have been created here. It doesn't really matter what order these are in. I kind of, just for sake of, I do this on all of the build plugins that I build. I usually organize these in the way that makes the most sense to me. So I'm going to do that again. Just GitHub app and then the private key to start. Then we're going to ask for the branch and the repo, then the destination directory. If you wanted to go ahead and put descriptions in all of these, you can. I think I have descriptions for all of them in my development instance. I don't think I'm going to go through that here, but I am going to make a couple of changes to these. So the first thing I'm going to do is on my private key, we don't want to let that private key that we downloaded be stored in clear text. So we're going to change this from a string to a password. So that's the first thing that we're going to do. I believe that's all that I want to do so far. So my plugin now, I've changed the type on one of the inputs. I should be able to hit my back arrow and get back to the recurring job itself. And you'll notice now my recurring job doesn't have any, I don't even think it shows here, but there's no default input set for any of these. It doesn't have a schedule or anything like that. So what we're going to do now is go through and set those up. And remember we downloaded our app and our private key. So I have those stored over here on the side. Here is my app ID. App ID is not something we need to keep secret, so I'm just going to paste that in clear text. And then when I paste my private key, we should see this as a password. There you go. So password. So again, we want to store that in an encrypted fashion. Then the default branch for GitHub branch, I'm just going to do main. It's a repo that I'm the only one that uses it. Default value for GitHub repo. We're going to do, again, a personal repo. And then default value for destination directory. So let's talk about this a little bit. When we look at let's go ahead and pull up PyCharm real quick. So I'm currently in my ProServe directory. So var opt CloudBolt ProServe. Under here, I have a lot of different directories available. Basically, you can choose any path that lives under the ProServe directory. It can't be the ProServe directory itself. Because ProServe persists past upgrades, we don't want to wipe out your repository files during an upgrade. So we want to make that, when I wrote this, I just wrote it in a way that's going to make you use the ProServe directory. So we're going to use the ProServe directory, and I have a subdirectory here called repos, and I'm going to put all of this in. Actually, I'm on the wrong server. Let's connect to this is my development server. Let's go to the new server that we're working on that hasn't had this implemented yet. So I don't have a repos directory, so I'm going to make one. Actually, I'm not going to make one, but what's going to happen, we're going to have a repos directory show up here when this is done running. Basically, it's, here I have, I'll show you, I didn't sync it over, so never mind. We won't even see it here. But we'll have a repos directory, and under that repos directory will be the parent directory for the single repository that we're leveraging. So again, just to show here that it doesn't currently exist, so that when we run things, that this is a new thing that we've done. I can come back over here, copy that, so I don't have to type it. Probably would have been just as quick at this point. And then I'm going to point it at repos. Perfect. So those are my inputs. That's what it should look like. And then my schedule, in my environment, I want this to run once an hour. So I'm going to set a schedule of once an hour. You could, and usually what I do while I'm testing these, I don't enable them yet. So I'll disable this real quick, and then I could just manually run this to see that it's working correctly. And once it's validated, I can then enable the job, and then it'll happen once an hour. Okay, so our job is completely set up. And this is what I was talking about with multiple recurring jobs using one shared plugin. I can leverage or reuse this same shared plugin with multiple recurring jobs. I would still use the same app ID and the same private key, but I would point it at a different repository, maybe a different branch, a different directory. What that's going to do then is store these on my file system for those additional repositories that we may want to set this up for. So you could call your recurring job something a little more explicit, like sync CloudBolt samples repo is what you could call it. And then you point at the CloudBolt samples repo or whatever repo you're trying to target. And then in that way, you can sync multiple repositories to the CloudBolt file system. Okay, so this is set up now. And assuming I did everything correctly, I should be able to run this and see that things are working. Okay, we'll check out the job, just make sure that it functioned. Okay, no errors, so that's always a good start. Let's just take a look at the log real quick. I think we're good. So the other thing I'll show before we even check the file system, I'm going to rerun it and notice that we just see that it's completed with success. Let's rerun this one more time, and I'm going to show you the different message for when something exists, but there weren't any changes made. So notice it's telling us branch is not changed, not downloading a new zip. This will only actually download new content when your branch that we're targeting has proceeded beyond, has a commit newer than the one that the last commit that we're working from here. So if that SHA changes, or if you roll back that branch to a previous commit, it will also go and revert those changes. So let's just talk about this a little bit real quick. Over to our file system now, if we do an ls, we should see there's my repos directory that I specified. So it created the directory when it ran. You could also target an existing directory. Oh. Okay, and now what you'll see is there's now a folder in here that matches owner or organization name, hyphen, CloudBolt samples, hyphen, and then the branch. So owner, repo, branch is the standard that I went with the name here. You could change this if you don't like that. If you just wanted it to be the repo itself, you could change that right here and change this repo path the way that I'm building this out here. But you can see my destination, and then my repo, and then my branch. So what's interesting? Oh, yeah. So my repo, when we pass this repo variable in, it's actually owner/repo. So it's just taking the slash and replacing it with a hyphen. That's where we're coming up with a name. So here's my new directory. So I should be able to change into this directory and see all of my content. So there's a whole bunch of directories. There's a whole bunch of different files that exist here now. So the next thing that I will talk about is really So the means that I'm using to copy this content down, I'm doing REST calls, and this is just a real quick sample to set this up. So versus what happens when I download the zip file over a REST URL, I don't get the Git files added in here. So part of the challenge that I ran into was I didn't have anything locally that would allow me to version things. So I'm actually creating this branch sha.json. So you'll see the sha of the existing branch. I'm writing that out manually in here. So that's not part of your repository, but it's something that we're using to manage this. Basically, if we go and pull a branch and see that the SHA has changed, whether it's an older or newer commit, it will then download the zip file. Then it will go through and delete this directory if the SHAs were different, and it will re-upload all of the code to this new directory. So you want to be careful using this, this method. You're not going to be able to create any files in this directory, because if it syncs and there's a different commit, it's going to delete files under this directory. So just don't write any files here. That's what the Git repository is leveraged for. You'd have to commit it to Git versus downloading it to CloudBolt directly. So, okay, so let's just show that this works. I have a branch of my repository here on my computer. Let's go to, here's my CloudBolt samples branch. I'm just going to go through and create a new text file. Just call it test2.txt. I did test.txt earlier. I already deleted it, but just to show that this is new, I'm going to just commit this real quick. Here's my CloudBolt samples. Here's my commit. I'm going to push this to the main branch. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to just run my job again. Okay, run now. Go back over to the job. You'll notice it did not exit right away, which tells me that it did pull down new content. I can go back over to CloudBolt and I can do ls. So the directory looks the same, but if we change into the directory again, and you'll notice I went back up a directory because when I delete it, Linux knows that it's a different directory that's getting created. So, and there's my test2.txt file. I'm just going to go back through the process again to show that by that deletion, we are in fact removing files if they don't exist anymore. So GitHub, it's now removed, committing to main, pushing origin. That now exists in Git. We can go ahead and rerun my action one more time. Run now. There we go. It is done. And I can't do an ls now because the directory it was removed while I was in it. So again, there's my mbom67. And test2.txt is now no longer present. So I'm just showing that this directory on the CloudBolt system is now synchronized with Git. And now when we go and enable this recurring job, because we've proved and validated that it is functional, I can now enable this for my system, and it will happen once every single hour in my environment. Again, this is just cron style scheduling, so you can just put in the appropriate schedule that you want this to run on, and it will run every hour, every day, every 5 minutes, whatever works best for your environment. So great, that worked pretty well. So this is up and running. It's now available in my environment. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a look at how to set the content to a remote source on the file system. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to set up a real basic server action. Again, the point here is to show that we are able to reference those files in the file system. So I have some server actions in this repository already. I'm going to go with this add disk in Windows OS. And then basically I'm going to reference the Python file in here. So I have this Python file that I should be able to reference here. Let's go ahead and do, I think it was in the wrong place. Let's do server actions. I can do add a server action. Actually, just check something real quick. There we go. CloudBolt plugin, new plugin, add disk in Windows. I could put filters on here if I wanted to. In this instance, probably going to be Windows, right? It's a Windows server. So let's go ahead and create this action now. This is going to create my plugin, and the plugin is really what we're going to synchronize from the system. Add disk in Windows. I can hop over to my plugin here. And now you'll notice it's just kind of the default generic out of the box CloudBolt plugin. I can go in and edit this, and I can do fetch from URL, and I can do file : // There's going to be a third slash, but I want to copy this directory because it's a long one. And that's going to include the third slash there. So 3 slashes, the first two tell it it's a file path. The third one starts the path down to my directory. Let me expand this a little bit. I want to go to the right there. I thought I saw. Oh, well, I give up. Put a trailing slash, and then I'm going to get you know what? I didn't go far enough. Notice there are some spaces in here that should work fine. We'll find out in just a second. And then I need the file name. I want the Python file. All right, so that should do the trick. Let's go ahead and save and just verify that we're seeing this change in our editor. There we go. So it's pulling in my script from the file system. Now I'm just going to change one of these and commit it back to Git and just verify that in CloudBolt, after running the recurring job, it shows up in here. So let's go back over to CloudBolt samples. We have server actions. Let's go to add disk in Windows OS. Hook for add disk. Let's go to my Python file. Just open it. VS Code is fine. And then I'm going to put in, let's just do make some changes here real quick. I'm going to save, back over to GitHub. Let's commit. Let's push. Okay, it's now available in GitHub, so I should be able to go back to my recurring job. There it is. I could have just hit the play button there as well. Run now. Run. Okay, so it didn't exit, meaning that it saw a change. And now if we go through in our plugin and we refresh, reaches back out to the file system, and we can now see that it's pulling that down from GitHub. So that's kind of end-to-end, getting everything set up. And then as you have new content you're adding, you can get it added in your CloudBolt instance, reference that remote source on your file system, and that will help keep things in sync with your GitOps processes. One last thing, I didn't have this in the agenda, but one last thing that I'm thinking through here, it's just kind of showing the underlying code and what we're doing there. Just I think would be good to run through. So this Git app testing, we have a run method. That's the insertion point for CloudBolt. We have a number of inputs that we're doing. We're capturing the app ID, the private key. We then have to format the private key because the way that we're passing that through the password field gets rid of the new characters. So I have to kind of add the new line characters back in on the fly. And then our repo branch and destination. So here's our inputs. There are some logs for the inputs there. And then we're going to go through, I construct what the zip file path is going to be, so where we're going to download it. I am downloading to var TMP. If you don't allow that in your environment, you could change this if you wanted to. The repo path is then taking that destination. And then it's creating the name. So this is where the file is going to end up when things are said and done. It's then doing some checks. The repo, like I'd mentioned, does need to be provided in owner/repo format. So if it doesn't see it in that format, it's going to throw an error. And then it's going to check to be sure that those files end up under the ProServe directory. So like what we talked about before, this is just some validation to get started on things. Here's really where things happen, where we're going to go and talk to the Git app session. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But the branch SHA, we're going to get the remote branch SHA, then we're going to get the local branch SHA, what I saved in that JSON file. It does log those two. So if you wanted to validate that you're seeing different SHAs or the same SHA, you could. And then it's going to compare the two. And this is where we're getting that message from when we return it. If they're not the same SHA, it is going to go out and save that repo zip to file. So it's going to download the repository from GitHub, save it to the file that we've specified, so that we now have our zip file. But then what we're going to do with the zip file, we're going to unzip it, we're going to extract it, we're going to move it to the path that was specified. And then the last thing we're going to do is save that current SHA for the file that was just downloaded. So that's kind of the whole thing. That's the run method, just what we're doing. But really the star of the show here is this GitHub app session. This actually came from one of my coworkers that had put this together 5 years ago or so, and I just kind of took it and ran with it. But basically we're creating a new class that is going through, when you call this with a with method, let's go to the inner method. It's going to first create the Java web token, which takes your private key and dates and a couple of other things and puts them all together into what's called Java web token. That is then used to go out and get a bearer token from GitHub for the specific use case that we're looking for. So it uses your private key and everything compartmentalized and gets a bearer token. That bearer token is then what we used for authenticating to the API. So you don't use that private key, but the private key is used to actually get the token that we're using for the session that we're running. So that's kind of in a nutshell, most of what we're doing. There's a whole bunch of other things that are happening here, but really they support this process. It's all about unzipping, moving files, those kinds of things. So this concludes another video in the How Do I Do Something in CloudBolt video series. If you've made it this far, congratulations. Some of these can get to be a little bit lengthy. If you have any questions at all regarding anything that we've covered today, or really just anything about CloudBolt in general, please reach out to your account team. We're happy to cover any questions you may have. And we're always looking for additional ideas to cover as part of this series. So please reach out to your account team. Let us know how we can help you. And happy automating with CloudBolt.